Story 1. Yes, you will never understand the pain of someone who has a degenerative bone disease or who can no longer survive without constant care. For those people, life is shame, anguish, and pain. We should not assume we know better and take that choice away from them. Story 2. I do, but I think it is an option that should only be presented by the patient. I do not think clinicians should recommend it, just as a safeguard. Story 3. Yes, I support the idea. I watched both of my parents die slowly from horrible diseases. I doubt either of them would have chosen differently, but I do not think anybody should be forced to suffer the final stages of a terminal illness. Your life is your own, and that should include the right to end it. However, aside from making it legal, the state and health insurers should absolutely stay out of this. It needs to be completely independent. We do not want to end up where you go to the doctor for depression and the doctor asks if you have considered medical assistance in dying, or where people end up going through medical assistance in dying because they could not get the care they need. The system cannot create any incentive for health providers to withhold care in the hopes you will choose medical assistance in dying. That is absolutely inappropriate. Story 4. Yes, I have a serious chronic illness that makes my life not very fun, interesting, or rewarding. Many people have it even worse than I do, so I understand why they would feel this way. Story 5. Absolutely, I understand people's concerns about it being abused, but it is the right and merciful thing to do. There is no point in forcing terminally ill people to suffer. Story 6. Yes, I support euthanasia for those who are willing. People should have the right to live and die with dignity. As long as they are of sound mind, there is no reason to deny them that. Story 7. I definitely do. But I also understand how it would have to ensure that people were not choosing it mostly on an economic basis or being pressured by family members who want to save money on costly medical treatments. We would have to be very thoughtful about how it was implemented and learn from the places where it is already happening. I hope it becomes a universal right in my lifetime. Story 8. Yes. There comes a point where fighting for more time is pointless. Given the choice between lying in a bed, waiting for the end day after a painful day in a drugged haze, or having my family watch a movie with me, smoke some cannabis, have some laughs, then just flick an intravenous drip or take some pills and let it all fade away. Story 9. My grandfather had Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. He passed away long before his body stopped functioning. In the end, he was sustained by a moist sponge, some meal replacement shake, or yogurt if his swallowing reflex still worked. It took over 4 weeks for his body to finally die. Story 10. Yes. In Canada, it is called medical assistance in dying. My mom is on the program and will call it in when she is ready. I believe humans should have that choice. My province's government has been wrongfully recommending this option to disabled adults who do not want to die. They are seeking assistance with housing, employment, bills, and food. The provincial government would rather tell them to end their lives legally than improve social programs that should support our most vulnerable populations. That is what I disagree with. Medical assistance in dying should not be a tool for genocide. It is a program for compassion and dignity. Story 11. Yes. The National Public Radio host Diane Rem, who had a shaky voice because of a rare and inexplicable disease that temporarily stopped her ability to speak, had a deep and fascinating episode about assisted suicide. She explained that her own husband had severe Parkinson's disease and had been essentially dying for years, so they both agreed that when he wanted to pass, they would be okay with that choice. She interviewed medical professionals who work in hospice care and who performed assisted suicides. It was really interesting and heartbreaking, but it reinforced my thoughts on giving people the freedom of choice. Story 12. I have seen many people end their lives in various ways, so I fully support them dying on their own terms with dignity. Story 13. Yes. I have stage 4 cancer and medically assisted suicide is legal here, I think. I am glad it is an option for me if my suffering becomes too great. I am already suffering, but it is not enough to be ready to die yet. Story 14. I have been a supporter of dignity in dying since I first learned about the Swiss Right to Die organization in Sweden in 2011 from Terry Pratchett. It was confirmed for me in 2012 when my family had me shave my grandfather as he lay dying in a hospital bed, unable to communicate with us. You should have the right to end your own life. No question. Nuif, on orbu. Story 15. Yes. Suicides bring a lot of misery into the world. Botched suicides, the person finding the body, the driver of the vehicle they jumped in front of, the police officer forced to shoot in a suicide by cop, and so on. Just give people a clean and simple way to check out when they are done trying. Story 16. My grandmother and my mother-in-law both had long, slow, and very painful deaths as they wasted away in hospice. That is the very frustrating part of it all. People can choose to die by refusing to eat. That is already perfectly legal. It is a horrible way to end your own life and painful for those around you to watch. Families can fight to get a feeding tube or other interventions, but really, why? At the end of the day, if someone has an incurable condition that causes significant pain or requires round-the-clock medical attention for the rest of their life, however long that might be, and they choose to skip to the end, let them. Story 17. The only thing I hate more than telling someone how to live is telling someone how they can die. I try to mind my own business. I am a Midwesterner. Story 18. It is impossible to work in a nursing home and not support this. Death is neither clean nor painless, not by a long shot, even when it is inevitable. I took care of people with late-stage Alzheimer's who suffered every second of every day for years with not the slightest clue who or where they were. For what? Story 19. Yes. Everyone deserves a legal exit from suffering. I do worry about it becoming an easier, cheaper option than treatment in incurable conditions, and those that could be helped with effort being pushed towards voluntary assisted dying instead just because it is easier. Story 20. I absolutely support the right of a person to seek medical aid in dying. It is their body, their life, their choice. Story 21. I'm in Canada and my mom used medical assistance in dying 3 years ago. It is something she requested from her doctor when she became very sick and there was no way to get better. My 2 siblings and I all agreed with her request and were beside her when it took place. Story 22. I watched my wife die of lung cancer, stage 4. She underwent chemotherapy and radiation, and they said she was cured. The cancer moved to her brain, and she died within a month. Hospice came in, and the medication helped ease her passing. I am clear that I do not want to linger until the cancer drains the life out of me. Story 23. I have been living with cancer for 3 years and have had 3 surgeries so far. My cancer does not respond to chemotherapy, so if or when it gets worse, it will require more surgeries and immunotherapy. I am sure there will be a time when the quality of life is too low, and I think voluntary assisted dying should be an option. Story 24. Watching tumors grow out of your body and slowly devour you bite by bite, suffering pain every second of your slow death, is neither honorable nor worth forcing. Seeing a loved one face this is heartbreaking. Leaving them to endure eating and drinking difficulties or attempt to end their own life alone as their only options is devastating. Story 25. Unpopular opinion. I think anyone should be able to check out whenever they want, even if they do not have a terminal disease. Story 26. As a disabled person, my opinion is very clear. I do not support voluntary assisted dying as it stands because it is being used to essentially treat it like eugenics of disabled people. It is pushed on us more than a choice we want to make. Most of us do not want to die. We want help and accommodations that can literally save our lives. We do not want to lose our disability rights when we get married. We will never reach marriage equality until disabled people can keep their disability rights after marriage. We do not want to spend at least $10,000 on mobility aids, medications, and doctor visits. Voluntary assisted dying should be the last resort and only brought up by the patient. Story 27. We put our animals down because they are in pain, but we do not do it for humans because it is considered immoral. Any argument against it is nonsense in my opinion, and I fully support it. Story 28. Yes, people still take their own lives. The difference is that often their attempts only result in severe injury or paralysis. They have the right to die in peace. Story 29. I was in a situation where my mom was dying of dementia in a care home a few hours from where I live. When I visited, I was always sad that such a unique, strong woman had been reduced to a shell. When she was still lucid, she wanted to walk out into a winter night and go to sleep but did not have the courage. She spent 5 years slowly dying there. In the middle of that, my dog was nearing the end. We finally decided to have the veterinarian come to our house to put her to sleep. We did it in the backyard in the shade on her favorite blanket. I swear she knew what was going to happen and was grateful because she came to each one of my family members and kissed us, tail wagging the whole time, even though she had not been happy and wagging for some weeks. It was not lost on me that we could ease a pet's suffering so easily by just booking an appointment and paying a small fee, when my mother begged for ease and was not allowed. I am in Canada, where assisted dying is permitted, but you have to be mentally capable to request it, and she was not considered so because of the disease. I believe there are now discussions happening to explore how best to approach medically assisted death for people with reduced mental capacity, which is a very difficult issue. Story 30. Sure, 100%. Absolutely. The only issue is this being advertised or promoted when unnecessary, which, to be fair, may have happened in Canada. It may be untrue or exaggerated propaganda, but apparently it is being pushed on people and on facilities to provide it. You do, however, have the right to live or die as you wish. Story 31. Sure do. Are there going to be issues to work out? Of course. Should there be processes in place to ensure people are not being forced or manipulated into doing so? Absolutely. But an outright no is unwise. People should not have to suffer beyond what they can handle for the sake of a natural death. We give our pets more respect than that. Story 32. It seems like an obvious point that people's suffering should be allowed to end that suffering, but I have concerns about where it leads. When might the government decide to step in and turn voluntary into compulsory? I know this is a slippery slope argument, but many things have gone from good ideas to really bad ideas very quickly. Story 33. A right to die should be a human right. At some point, if you do not have a right to die, you do not have a right to live either. Story 34. Of course. Life is one of the unalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence. Granted, it is more of a philosophical document than a legal one. But still, if one truly has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to do as you please with your life should be included. In my opinion, we value life too much in society if we would rather force someone to suffer against their will than let them consensually die. Story 35. I support it. I do not think it needs to be limited to terminal illness. Naturally, there need to be safeguards, but if someone says they are done, they should be given the dignity to pass without pain. The process should be long but inexpensive. The long process will allow time to change their mind, which is not possible when they choose methods such as firearms or medication to end their life. Story 36. Yes, I support it for anyone, not just people with terminal illnesses. You do not get a choice to enter the world. You should get a choice to leave it. Story 37. In theory, yes, but with caveats. Simply having certain non-fatal medical conditions should not be enough for it. You should have to at least try therapy or treatment for whatever you are dealing with, if it is something like diabetes or a neurodevelopmental condition. Any doctor who suggests this to a patient should have their medical license revoked. Only the patient should be able to request it, and it should never be suggested. There are already cases where it has been suggested to suicidal veterans in Canada, and that needs to stop immediately. Story 38, of course. If someone is done being here, it is their choice. I do think there need to be standards to avoid people making rash decisions. I have worked in healthcare for years and have watched many people who truly want to die not be allowed to. I think it is inhumane to stigmatize wanting to carry on with a natural process. We have many taboos around death, which is unhealthy. Story 39. I work with people who have mesothelioma. The amount of agony they experience before the end, the way their whole body fails and betrays them while they essentially drown in their own lungs, is horrific. Usually, by the end, they are barely coherent or aware because of the pain and oxygen deprivation. For the love of humanity, let them die with dignity. Story 40. I support it. I know 6 people who chose that. 3 had cancer, 1 had a terminal lung disease, 1 had heart and lung disease, and the other was 98 and did not want to move into a care facility. They had time to speak to their families and make their arrangements. The 98-year-old played cards, ate chicken from her favorite place, and had a drink before the doctor arrived. One chose to do it at home in his favorite chair. We do not know how much someone is suffering, so we should not judge them. I think it is great that they can choose to die safely surrounded by family and friends. Story 41. I do. Offering someone a path out of excessive pain or a terminal condition is a respectful action. Not everyone sees their own life as sacred, and people need to understand that. Story 42. I have seen my grandfather and my mother go through the stages of Alzheimer's disease. It is my hope that if it continues in our family, my children will not have to experience what I have. I prepared a letter to them explaining why I will make this decision if it becomes necessary. If it is not legal, I suppose I will have to find another way. Story 43. We do it for our animals but not for our loved ones. Your mother can suffer, but your dog is put out of its misery. Let people die with dignity. Story 44. I actually wrote a paper on this. Regarding people with disabilities, they are systematically strongly encouraged to proceed, even if they show no need or interest. Especially with people with mental disabilities or severe conditions, there is always the risk of influence from another party, withheld information, or lack of understanding of the situation. If the rule were to limit entry for people with mental disabilities, then it would violate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. However, allowing unrestricted access risks the potential eradication of people with disabilities. There is a lot to consider here. Story 45. Yes, why is it that animals can be euthanized to end their suffering, but someone with a slow, painful terminal illness cannot choose to end their own misery? Story 46. It is actually more harmful to force chronically ill people to suffer. When their minds are exhausted and they want to end their lives, they may attempt it in unsafe ways that cause more pain and suffering for family and friends. Assisted dying allows people to die painlessly when they choose to do so. The only arguments against assisted dying are religious, which I do not consider. Story 47. I would imagine the pharmaceutical industry is probably strongly against it, but there is no humane reason to outlaw it. Story 48. Absolutely, if the person in question fully desires it. In the Netherlands, euthanasia is legal, and there are protocols in place to ensure the person seeking euthanasia fully understands the ramifications of that decision. In the United States, euthanasia for pets is encouraged when their quality of life becomes untenable. 13 states allow euthanasia under specific circumstances for people, but this should be an option for every person in all 50 states. Sadly, some religious groups prioritize suffering over granting a final act of bodily autonomy. Story 49. I support voluntary assisted dying. Suicide is a right, so people should not be denied that right because they need help to do it. Obviously, it needs to be heavily regulated to prevent misuse. If someone has had enough, why should they not be supported to go with dignity? We afford that to pets, so why not to grandparents? Story 50. I support it. What I do not support is that where I am, you can get an assisted death faster than, for example, disability support. Story 51. I watched my parents die. I recently watched my sister die of bone cancer. There is no medication in the world that can manage that pain. It is up to the individual. It is a difficult decision. It is not a decision taken lightly. It is a decision people come to after much heartfelt debate in their minds. It is their choice. I put my pets down out of compassion. My parents suffered. My sister suffered. We all die. Story 52. Yes, but only with very careful screening by professionally trained psychologists. I would not want people to be manipulated into using the service by insurance providers, medical professionals, caregivers, or family members. Story 53. Yes. My mother had a myotrophic lateral sclerosis. She was so desperate that she asked me to help her die. I was only 16 years old. Anyone who does not support this has no idea what they are talking about. Story 54. I do. You should always allow people to make their own choices, as everyone's circumstances are different. Story 55. For people who are out of options and suffering with no hope of recovering, yes. I watched cancer kill my mom and my partner's dad, and I watched my nan die of multiple sclerosis. None of them wanted to die, but I know they would have chosen assisted dying over the end they had. My nan's death was very horrific, and the cancer my mum and my partner's dad had was eating away at them until they were skeletal and in pain. They died terribly. I wouldn't wish the way they died on anybody. They deserved much more dignity than they received. Story 56. I support it completely. If someone is suffering pain beyond belief or is unable to live the way they want, they should be able to make a sound decision to end their life with medical assistance from a doctor. We are not mind readers and cannot know what a person is going through or feeling. Knowing that they will suffer a prolonged and painful death, whether by disease or accident, with no chance of full recovery, that person should have the God-given right to end their suffering through medically assisted death. I have had several friends who chose this option to avoid further suffering and pain for themselves and their families, with no chance of recovery. Several of them donated their organs to people in desperate need. I believe our society should embrace this practice. It would save the person and their families a great deal of grief and ensure they leave this world without pain. I have spoken to many friends who are either for or against this with valid reasons on both sides, but in the end, I believe the individual who is suffering should be considered first. Story 57. After watching my grandmother take a long weekend to die, I do not ever want to go through that. We give more compassion to our pets. Story 58. I support it as long as there are strict limitations and guidelines. Do not allow a suicidal person to simply request to end their life. Do not allow a family to insist that their comatose family member receive voluntary assisted dying instead of care. Do not allow parents to demand voluntary assisted dying instead of assistance for a disabled or otherwise difficult child. It should only ever be the actual patient's choice as an alternative to treatment for something causing significant suffering that will not be cured or fixed. Story 59. When our pets no longer have a good quality of life due to disease or aging, we end their suffering as an act of mercy. Why can't we extend that mercy to family? Story 60. It is right in line with the do not resuscitate an organ donor stamps on my driver's license. My body, my parts, and if I am in so much pain that I want to escape it, then yes, for goodness sake, let me do so. My dad died in hospice after signaling that he was ready for all the morphine. While it differs from voluntary assisted dying, it is not a lethal morphine shot, but certainly a block on his suffering while his own body failed. There is a slim margin between the two. Story 61. No, how would I gain my fortune by siphoning every last penny from those living as they slowly decay in my nursing home? Story 62. I feel that not supporting someone in their suffering is one of the worst forms of cruelty. When people are in pain and cannot endure anymore, it is no one else's business whether they choose to end their life. As a nurse, I have seen families force treatment on patients who have no quality of life or who do not want any more life-saving measures. We like to think of ourselves as a civilized society, but forcing someone to live with constant pain because of your personal beliefs is a special kind of cruelty. Story 63. My stance is that it should only be available for patients who are both terminally ill and in untreatable pain. I do not want to be the one to tell Grandpa that he needs to spend 6 more months writhing in agony. But I also do not want a world where poor people with disabilities are encouraged to kill themselves because it is cheaper than providing assistance in living. Nor do I want a world where perfectly healthy people can step into a suicide booth just because they have ennui. If your response is, what about diseases that cause untreatable suffering? Then please read my post again. Story 64. Yes, it is our life to do with as we choose. A possible point of playing devil's advocate could involve the potential strain it puts on the person performing the act. I cannot imagine that a doctor, even following a patient's instructions, would not feel something when asked to do this multiple times. Story 65. Yes, much better than people ending their lives in harmful ways and putting others in danger during the process. If you are over 18, you should be able to make this decision. Story 66. I have never been more proud of my country, Canada, than when they instituted the Medical Assistance in Dying Act. Regardless of your religion, people should have the right to choose when and how to leave this world and to do so in a safe and dignified manner. Story 67. Yes, although it is taking a disturbing turn in Canada, with some unusual reasons to consider it without an underlying impending death. However, I also think the right to die should not require consent at the time of death. Cognitive decline is horrible, but almost nowhere on Earth that has the right to die will allow an advance directive. By the time cognitive decline is severe enough to warrant euthanasia, patients can no longer consent. Story 68. No, because it concerns me the way it could be and already has been abused, not by the patient but by the system. I have heard stories of it being recommended to patients who could not afford other treatment options, which feels deeply dystopian to me. You could spend thousands on this treatment or you could just die now. Up to you. In our current economy and the way the healthcare system is set up, I fear that too many people would choose it because they felt they had no other option, not because they actually wanted it. Story 69. It is inevitable that this option will be imposed on disabled persons instead of supporting them. Story 70. This would end Medicare and Medicaid benefits going to and from hospitals and insurance companies for this patient much too soon, sooner than they were expecting. Story 71. Yes, I support this. The person who is suffering should be the one to decide if they want to keep fighting or if the battle has been lost. Story 72. Yes. My main issue would be in places like the United States where if somebody did not choose this, it could bankrupt a family or otherwise destroy an inheritance. In this case, there would be a clear monetary reason for somebody to kill themselves. And depending on the circumstances, the voluntary assisted dying may not be entirely voluntary. That is the main issue I would have. But if there are no monetary issues and somebody just does not want to live through brain cancer, I understand that. Story 73. Absolutely. I've had 18 bone surgeries and am scheduling 2 more now once my bones completely deteriorate. Am I supposed to endure untold years of pain? No, thank you. Story 74. Yes. I believe everyone should have the right to end their own life, and it should not matter if they are medically ill. What sense does it make to force someone to live when they no longer want to live that life? Yes, I am sure there would be people who might experience regret in the last moments, but that is not something we should worry about. Story 75. Yes. The only thing worse than watching loved ones deteriorate and be in immense amounts of pain and suffering is probably being the loved one deteriorating and experiencing immense amounts of pain and suffering. Additionally, we euthanize animals when they have little to no quality of life, so why can't we do it for people? Story 76. Yes, for sure. I think it is really strange that quality of life is typically only considered for pets. It is so normal and socially acceptable to euthanize a dog because their health is declining and affecting their quality of life. Why do we understand that this is acceptable and good for animals but cannot accept that this may be good for people as well? Story 77. Yes, as long as the patient chooses voluntary assisted dying without coercion, they should have the dignity to decide how to end their life. It is cruel to prolong somebody's suffering when death is a foregone conclusion and they are in constant pain. I'm not saying that you must end your dying grandmother's life with advanced cancer and no hope of recovery. If she wants to fight to the bitter end and wants every attempt to keep her alive, her choice should be honored. But if she decides she is ready to go now, she should have the bodily autonomy to say so, and it should be as comfortable as possible for her. Story 78. Yes, I do. We do it for animals who are suffering. I want the option to die quickly before something slow takes me. I want to die as myself and not as what dementia would make me. Story 79. It is a fundamental right for anyone to choose when they wish to end their life journey. The only reason it is not allowed is due to superstitious religious beliefs. Story 80. I strongly support it, and I am fortunate to live in a country where it is available for those who need it. It obviously requires guidelines and oversight, but people should be allowed to end their lives with dignity. Story 81. I have seen a few people die of cancer. It has always been horrible. My father-in-law recently chose euthanasia after a very short, very painful bout of pancreatic cancer, and it was a good death if such a thing exists. Family was present, the mood was light with music and jokes, he received a large dose of Valium, and the finish was painless. I could not be happier that it was not a natural, horrific death a few weeks later. Story 82. Yes, I support voluntary assisted dying. I am concerned that some people might forge paperwork and abuse the system to unlawfully end someone's life, but that is just a fear. It should not prevent us from allowing individuals to have control over how their life proceeds and how it ends. Story 83. Yes, but only for people with incurable terminal illnesses or those diagnosed with conditions such as Alzheimer's disease or dementia. These individuals should be able to express early on, "If I reach this point, end my suffering." This decision should be carried out by a trusted person with power of attorney. We routinely euthanize animals to prevent suffering. We should have the same right to make that choice for ourselves. Story 84. I support the concept if there is no external factor potentially coercing the person into ending their life in the case of terminal medical conditions. My concern is the prospect of financial or societal pressures coercing someone into choosing death to save their family or government money. Story 85. Yes, I have seen patients suffer from osteogenesis imperfecta, osteosarcoma, and osteoporosis. I cannot comment much about the pain they endured. Having a fractured bone knowing that it cannot be healed is one of the worst cruelties life has to offer. Story 86. Yes, but I think there is also a real risk in a cottage industry developing that simply helps anyone who wants it meet the requirements, regardless of whether they should or not. Therefore, I support it with strict regulation regarding the requirements for approval. Story 87. I do, but I want to know more about the process. It feels easily abusable, but I do not have the necessary context to accept that feeling as a legitimate concern. On the face of it, I know there will be a process where mental health professionals and medical doctors work long-term to determine if this is truly what the patient wants, and that it is not some other treatable factor, assuming the patient would be willing to consider alternatives. However, there is still an uneasy feeling of paranoia that it can be abused to essentially start killing off undesirables, as seen in the autism registry discourse in the United States. In short, I support it, but I do not trust the existing systems in my country to handle it with respect to human life. Additionally, I do not trust our economic system not to push it toward people who are considered a drain on the capital of insurance companies. For example, someone who has paid their premium their whole life but has stage 3 cancer might be pressured with costly decisions. Story 88. I do, but I feel like it should be a last resort. Both one of my grandfathers and an uncle died of terminal cancer. My grandfather was in and out of it towards the end since it metastasized to his brain. My uncle, at the very end, was in extreme pain from colon cancer that metastasized to his spine. He was very out of it and, because of other issues, was combative and basically having a psychotic episode during the last 24 hours. My cousins, in 7th and 9th grade, were extremely traumatized by it. I feel like both of them deserve to go with the dignity of my other grandfather on hospice who passed in his sleep after his last child made it home to say goodbye. I forget his cause of death, but it was not cancer. Story 89. Generally, yes, people should have the choice and not be forced to live, but decisions need to be carefully implemented to prevent uninformed choices that could lead to death. Story 90. Yes, the stories I have heard from people with family members who suffered from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and Huntington's disease are heartbreaking. They all say they wish their family members had the option. Story 91. In theory, yes. We put our pets down when their quality of life declines significantly and tell ourselves that it is a moral good not to prolong their suffering, but we do not allow our fellow human beings the same dignity. In practice, I am extremely wary of any policy that would give bad actors permission to try to convince undesirables to kill themselves. Story 92. I support it. I believe we should have a choice to leave this life peacefully and with dignity if that is what we want for our life and death. Story 93. In the event I am dying, my plans are already clear and have been communicated to my family. I do not want to spend my last days or weeks in pain. That said, economics also come into the picture. Of course, a better healthcare system in the United States is badly needed, but in the absence of that, I will not allow myself to bankrupt my spouse to gain a few more weeks or months. I watched a family member die slowly of Alzheimer's disease and do not want my body to continue when I am essentially gone. My wish is for a living will of sorts, where I could specify well in advance a point in the progression of the disease at which I would like to have it end. Maybe when I can no longer recognize my own children or spouse, or when fear of imaginary people makes me too afraid to live. The sad part is, the lack of that may force me to take my life well before I need to, while I am still cognizant and physically able to do so myself. Story 94. I think people should have therapy beforehand and be terminally ill. I do not agree with someone just walking into a clinic and saying, "End it all." Story 95. Yes. The pain that family and friends experience will happen anyway, just later. At least the person who dies does not have extended periods of physical and mental pain. Story 96. Yes, people have a right to die. We have to consider the impact on disabled people living in the country we live in. People should not be offered euthanasia if they would be given resources and community support and would decide to live. Story 97. After working for a nursing home and hearing elderly bedridden people cry out, "Just let me die already so I can be with my husband," I understood their pain. One woman, in particular, no longer had power of attorney and could not sign a do not resuscitate order. Her life was pitiful. Her children did not visit. She wanted to die so badly, but her body would not give up. She begged us to let her go to her husband. I will never forget the agony in her voice. Story 98. Yes. It is my life. Go away if you think otherwise. I was brought here against my will, but I will leave on my own accord. Futurama suicide booths. Anyone? Brilliant idea. Story 99. We have prolonged the life of the body but not the life of the mind. People should have the right to make this choice in a respectful way and even schedule it so family can be there without spending weeks or years watching a body deteriorate. Story 100. I think it is understandable from a patient perspective. Terminally ill, it is going to be painful the entire time with poor quality of life. I understand that. I do not really know how I feel about it from the doctor's perspective. I am not a doctor, but I feel there would be some moral issues that are difficult to express. From a purely objective standpoint, it is the compassionate thing to do, but it still involves intentionally ending someone's life. Story 101. Yes, it should be enough to have a letter stating when certain conditions occur, such as the inability to recognize your spouse of 50 years, indicating it is time. For example, if you are 75 years old and develop dementia, you have two choices under Canadian laws. You can choose to end your life 5 years early, or you can spend 3 years in diapers after losing your mind completely. Story 102. I support it for people who are suffering without the possibility of getting better. That has been legal where I live for quite some time now. Beyond that, I do not support anything else. Here, we have a political party that wants to give all people over the age of 70 a voluntary suicide pill. If it were up to them, they would give those pills to anyone who felt their life was finished. In my opinion, that is a terribly naive stance with many horrible consequences. Story 103. I am of two minds. First, there are types of diseases and suffering that can make living a constant state of pain and shame. Giving those people a way out is not a good thing. However, having it as an option could allow governments to use this last resort as an excuse for not providing care for disabled people. For example, if someone is disabled, their options for help might be nothing or ending their suffering. Unless healthcare is well provided and free from the beginning, having this option becomes an excuse for governments to stop providing disabled citizens with help. There was an incident last year involving a veteran in Canada, where voluntary assisted dying exists. The veteran contacted the Canadian Veterans Affairs asking for care, and they kept offering voluntary assisted dying rather than actual care options. Story 104. Yes. I lost my granddad to Parkinson's disease. It was slow and painful, watching him go from a strong, vibrant man who used to push me on the swings and take long bird-watching rambles where he could identify birds by their song, to basically an empty shell. Given the choice, I believe he would have chosen assisted death probably a year or two before he actually died. It would have been a kinder, more humane, and dignified death than he had. He loved life, but Parkinson's disease took him from us long before he actually died. Degenerative diseases are a horrifically brutal and painful way to go, and as long as we have no cure for them, I will support death with dignity. We grant it to our pets. Why not our loved ones? Yes, I have concerns, and I think there need to be stringent precautions, guidelines, and regulations to prevent abuse and coercion, but I support it nonetheless. Story 105. I do, but I think there needs to be a large number of safeguards put in place. Otherwise, people on public health plans may be encouraged to choose suicide by clinicians or have it written in their charts without any conversation. The potential for abuse of vulnerable people is significant. Story 106. Yes, my husband and I talked about it last night. We are a long way away from that, but neither of us wants the other or ourselves to suffer. Story 107. Yes, generally I think it is a mercy for terminally ill, bedridden, or chronic pain patients where there is little hope of reprieve or treatment. However, it can go too far in the other direction and become too widely available. Canada was going to make it available for people suffering from just mental illness. Previously, it required a chronic physical ailment to be eligible. It looks like that decision has been delayed for 2 years, thankfully. But that is a scary thought. Imagine someone you know is going through depression and has suicidal thoughts. The doctor tells them they can work hard on themselves with therapy for years or medical assistance in dying. Insane. While I think most people have good intentions and want to reduce suffering, this also allows those with bad intentions to abuse the system. I will let your imagination figure out what those situations are if medical assistance in dying is made available to those with only mental illness as a condition. Story 108. I have to support it. I personally understand how and why it could be necessary. Originally, I was completely against it. Unfortunately, life taught me some cruel lessons. I still think life is a precious gift that should never be wasted. Story 109. Yes. While I can understand why some people are against it, I believe individuals should have that option. Some people suffer from terrible diseases, illnesses, and genetic conditions. It is unfair to force them to live a life of pain, misery, and sadness simply because others do not want to feel uncomfortable. It is their choice, and allowing people a dignified and peaceful end is a moral act. As someone who has struggled with mental health issues and has attempted suicide in the past, which was very difficult, I would have been much happier and still prefer the opportunity to pass peacefully with a guaranteed end rather than continue to suffer alone. In my situation, most might argue against it, even though I have dealt with suicidal thoughts from a young age. We can euthanize animals when they are suffering, yet we do not always extend the same compassion to humans. Story 110. Yes, wholeheartedly. My mother-in-law is 92 years old. She has dementia, and it has been rapidly progressing. She has said many times how badly she wants to go home. She says her husband is waiting for her. She remembers him. She has missed him for 25 years. She tells us to just let her die. She wants to go to her heaven so badly. It breaks my heart. When someone is that tired of living, we should say, okay, let us get your doctor here to help you and us through this. She is a very loved and well taken care of lady. She is the best mother-in-law a girl could have been blessed with. I want her to have her wish, but laws and everything else stand in the way. Story 111. Yes. I work in healthcare and have seen people with conditions such as motor neuron disease die a slow death with immense suffering. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. Story 112. I watched my dad live for a week in a coma after a motorcycle accident before he died. 20 years later, I watched my mom suffer for years and finally die of Alzheimer's disease. You bet I would support voluntary assisted dying. Story 113. How exactly do we suggest to anyone that life must be lived just because? We have no idea what death is, other than the end of what we know life to be. If anyone wants to end it, they should have people willing to help them do so painlessly and with dignity. Story 114. Yes, I do. As I age, I don't have a wide circle of friends or acquaintances I can rely on if I need help. I have one sibling living in the same city, but we seem to be on different planets. My only child lives hours away. After more than 10 years of dealing with an elderly parent, with the last 4 years requiring 24-hour home care, I wouldn't want to put that burden on someone else. In a recent discussion with another sibling who lives on the opposite side of the country, he said he wants to live to at least 90 years of age. I said I didn't want to live that long, and that when I reach the point where I can no longer take care of my basic needs, I want to go. Story 115. I do mildly support it, but am also concerned. If someone is in pain and wants to end their life, that is understandable. However, it becomes problematic when this approach is applied to depression or homelessness. For example, when a hospital had to stop operating because they did not want to provide this service. They were not ordered to stop, but the city stopped working with them and refused to rent them the building anymore. Story 116. Yes, absolutely. When my mother was dying, she wanted some control over when she passed. Medical assistance in dying is a godsend. Story 117. Absolutely. If you have a terminal illness and do not want to suffer unnecessarily, you should not. Additionally, with healthcare costs in the United States, it makes sense to avoid slowly wasting away, possibly in pain, and increasing the financial burden on your family. Story 118. Watching my father die was awful. He had lung cancer and it spread to his brain. His last words were, "It hurts." Yes, I do not think we should force people to suffer. Story 119. Yes, with significant limitations. The issue the person is dealing with needs to be severe enough that it cannot be treated, only slightly managed, and there is no hope of recovery. If viable treatments have not yet been tried, those treatments must be attempted. The topic should only be brought up by the person themselves, never by an outside force such as a medical provider, and the process should move slowly. Ideally, the person should be of sound mind when making the decision. However, in extreme cases like degenerative brain disease, a patient's family may be involved. Many people in nursing homes are just waiting for their bodies to catch up with their brain's level of deterioration, which is sad. In Canada, the medical assistance in dying program has been expanded to include cases that raise concerns about a slippery slope. For example, there have been reports of a veteran calling Veterans Affairs for help with post-traumatic stress disorder. The hotline responded that care could not be provided but asked if the person had considered medical assistance in dying, which is completely unacceptable. In another case, a person called to have a wheelchair ramp installed in their home. They were told there was no money for the ramp but asked if they had considered dying. Currently, about 3 to 4% of deaths in Canada are related to the medical assistance in dying program, which is concerning on a large scale. Services are planned to be expanded in the next few years to include minors and those with mental health issues such as depression. While this may be beneficial for some extreme cases, it could easily be abused or applied to people who might have recovered if given proper support. Story 120. I absolutely do. People with degenerative diseases deserve to be able to die with dignity. My mother suffered for 25 years. No one deserves that. Story 121. Yes. Life should have some quality to it. Simply being alive is just survival. If someone does not want to continue because they are in constant pain with no way to stop it, they should be allowed to escape as peacefully as possible. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.